Right. Okay, that kind of leads me to a subject that I know that you've dealt with but are continuing to deal with as a teacher, the kind of idea that there's a value that students have from the time that they enter the school. You were saying before, there shouldn't be the idea that you're here as a teacher to save these poor students of color and teach them how to conform to the right way of doing things. And not from the learning. We're talking about the cultural stuff and also in terms of their past experience. Like you said, some of these kids are coming from high poverty. There's social needs there as well. But when we talk about the valuation of the student, one of the things that kind of leads into, obviously, is the the education reform movement that ties the valuation of teachers to the performance of students on high-stakes testing. The score by a student on a high-stakes test actually equals their value, which seems to remove all of the social history behind that student and personalizes who that student is. The student is either a success or a failure. And is that something that you've already dealt with or something that you see? What kind of pressures do you feel that puts upon you as a teacher who's trying to teach all students, and how does that affect maybe some of the choices that teachers have to make?
It's affected me a lot, and I've had to do a lot of negotiating when it comes to actually trying to teach all 30 students or all 27 students at the same time. I mean, it's one thing if I had a ton of time to work with and all the kids always came to school having had breakfast, having had a good night's rest, having had less issues or less arguments with their parents, or that they've already been settled and they did their homework at home and everybody expects them to do very well, and that those sorts of things matter, and people really need to take that into account. And also, I think just to maybe add a little tip for people, when my energy is one way, then that's going to reflect how the rest of the class goes. If I project this one sort of energy, then the class is not going to go very well. But if I project a sort of more positive and, I guess, firm sort of energy, then the class tends to go a little bit better. These are these little nuances that people don't think about. It's not just about, I guess, curriculum and standards. It's also about the energies that we bring into the classroom. And I know we've gone into that at length in this interview, which I think is critical. So if we just keep ourselves, I guess, grounded in the work, we can only do as much as we can. I mean, 30 students is quite a lot. And all things considered, we don't have all the power that we possibly can to affect every child that we possibly want to.
Now, that actually is another good transition. 30 students or more, let's say, in a class, and someone who's, like you said, kind of like a balancing act on how much you're going to be able to give, bring students up as much as possible in the limited time that you have. What role do you think discipline acts as maybe a crutch for or temptation for teachers? Because we are talking within the framework of the school-to-prison pipeline. Do you think that discipline somehow can become almost maybe an easier way to discipline their way to a manageable classroom, whether that's either size or just getting rid of certain students that are struggling?
You're absolutely correct in that. I think discipline is often, for me, the sort of indicator or the prep work that goes into teaching some kids that school is the way they're going to prepare for prison, in the sense that this is the way you're going to sit, this is the way you're going to stand, and don't go against these rules. These are all the rules that you can't break, and if you don't conform to this, then we're going to keep punishing you until, well, something happens. And I guess the one deal in school is that if once they've broken enough rules, then they either get transferred to another school or they just completely drop out. In prison, it doesn't quite work out that way. It's either they transfer them to a different prison or they put them in solitary confinement, which it's a whole other mess there. And I think a lot of people's mentality, again, a lot of teachers do believe that if you keep kids within their seats and one by one and you don't let them interact or, be human, then that's all right, because that makes the job so much easier. Like, they don't have an opinion. They don't really have to care, and that's the way that they're going to learn. And it might have some sort of results on a standardized test, but will it teach them how to be students that can think for themselves? And that's a question that we have to keep asking teachers across the country.
Yeah, definitely. And you are eloquent, and I just wanted to follow that up just because, you're probably aware that just generally in many of the school districts across the country, there are disproportionate placement of Black and Latino students, particularly males, and in basically segregating them by either placing them in alternative programs, alternative schools, even special education. I was wondering if that's something you think kind of fits within that whole idea of maybe managing behavior. This is not necessarily an education decision in the best interest of the student.
Oh, but definitely. I think there's a tendency to throw, again, Black males of color. I mean, I know I've said that a lot, and it's crazy to me that we're still having this discussion, but that you would put kids who, again, do not conform to whatever your standard boxes of what a regular student is, needs to be thrown down to special ed. And again, this is not me talking about anyone in particular. This is just what the national trend seems to be. Like, whenever you look inside the urban school districts or even rural school districts, you start noticing that through the halls, if there's any sort of smidgen of Black and Latino kids, a lot of them are going to end up in the special ed rooms, versus putting them with a teacher who, A, can handle them, and B, will actually want to teach them. And then there's also, and I haven't mentioned this at all, but I think principals and administrators also need to be able to step in and understand their personnel and understand the kids as well, and be able to reinforce a holistic idea of teaching, because they are, in fact, a teacher of teachers. So they, too, need to be held accountable for that, as well as the system as a whole. Like, we need to start thinking in terms of how the system, and you can name names here,
right.
want to have a certain proportion of kids, be in these programs. So then if there's any sort of gain, then they can say yes. And if there was any sort of loss, then they can always say, well, it's these kids. So, I mean, what can we do? We're just frustrated. We're trying to learn,
Yeah. Now, we're going to move more toward community involvement here in just a second, but I just want to make sure we've covered everything. And the last thing I wanted to ask you, I don't know your particular school, but I do know New York City Department of Education, the school district there, a report that was recently released by the NYCLU was talking about the incredible police presence that results in, I guess, 95% or more of school arrests involving Black and Latino students, which I'm sure is no shock to you, but maybe
Nope.
There's a lot of urban school districts that follow the model of New York, let's say. Or how do you feel in terms of dealing with having police have such a heavy presence in the schools? How does it affect you? How does it affect the mood of the school? How does it affect your students?
It depends a lot on who the police officers are. I mean, as a general policy, I'm not a fan of having police officers roam the halls of schools where children are learning, because if that was happening in richer or more upper-class schools, if it was happening in every single school in America and not just the urban ones. I guess the irony is the mass shootings don't happen in the poor schools. They're happening in the middle-class, upper-class schools where people say it's a freak accident. But and yet they won't put too many cops in there, but they'll put tons of cops in places where they think that the people are prone to violence, as always, and it's expected of them. But anyway, in general, I don't see a problem with having security guards of some nature, only because we do have a couple of elements like that often kind of infiltrate the school. And for some people, it makes it feel safer, so that's fair. But when those police officers go from working with the community to working against the community, then that becomes an issue. And oftentimes there are schools where the police officer or the security guard just wants to mess around with the child or trying to play with them to the point where they don't want to come back to the school, just because they don't like them, or they don't like their appearance, they don't like how they feel, they abuse their authority. And that happens too frequently within our schools. And by our, I mean schools that are heavily populated with children of color. So It's unfortunate because those are the places where law enforcement has the opportunity to have some redeeming qualities, and yet and still the police state constantly shows up in incidents where they shouldn't. And when they abuse their power, it's a reflection upon the entire process there.
Right. I think that was really well put. Those children, our children, appreciate that you tend to say our children as well. Black and Latino youth, you're talking about, the kids from low-income situations. As tough as they may seem on the outside, they're still children and they're still vulnerable. We treat them like adults all the time as if, they have to skip their childhood, and that's completely unfair. But now I think you've done such a great job in breaking down what the experiences are as a teacher in a large urban school district. I wanted to give you a chance to maybe turn it around and give those of us out there who might not be teachers, who might just be concerned community members, might be parents, might be, activists, lawyers, whatever. What do you need in terms of, you to accomplish your goal of teaching as many students as possible well and not have to deal with, being pulled out of your classroom, or whatever the obstacles are for you to reach these students? What type of community involvement might help improve the situation for you and for all those teachers and students out there that just want to go to school and have a good educational experience for everyone involved? What kind of help or support can we give you practically as this new school year is about to start?
Wow. Well, I think I mentioned this earlier, but frankly, it's very few and very great elements. Number one, make sure your child has already come fed. And I mean that they've had dinner the night before, that they had breakfast the morning of, and then make sure that they actually go into school at peace of some nature. And, try to make sure that that element is there, that vibe is there. Making sure that the student has had at least a good 7-8 hours of sleep helps a great deal. And I guess these are more spiritual things. You'll notice that I'm into that because you have to create what my fiance calls a low effective environment. Like, I guess in a sense, trying to make sure that when students come into the classroom that their energies are correct. And once that happens, then we're able to kind of create a relationship where everybody's receptive and open to each other. So, and then there's letting the teacher be as proactive as possible. And what I mean by that is I tend to call parents within the first 2 weeks of teaching. And I mean, I don't wait. Like, I actually try to make that open communication and leave those lines open in case the parent needs to reach me, because the special thing about Black and Latino parents is that they leave the teacher to be experts, and then they'll ask whenever need be. And of course, that can work to good and bad effect. But so long as the parent is constantly keeping tabs and making sure that we're on the same lines, we're talking about the same things, then I think that actually reflects upon the child. The child starts to understand things. And even if they're not necessarily working at 100%, at the very least, they can give us a little something where we can work with. And I think those are the children that I've always cherished, the ones who may not necessarily have all the smarts, but they try their absolute best, and you can kind of tell where they're coming from. And you could tell that from the parents more than anything else.
That was excellent. Well, thank you. I know that probably really busy trying to get prepared for the new school year, and I'm glad that you took the time with us today to give us a perspective on what it is like to be a teacher in the urban school district and to be a successful teacher, because I want to say that, I've followed you for a couple of years now, and regardless of what people might choose to value teachers and break that down to just test scores, it's more about what that teacher is bringing to the classroom every day and actually caring, and I know that you really do care about making sure that students are able to learn and they believe that they can learn. I appreciate you for that. Give our listeners your website or any other way that they can contact you if they want to follow up on your work in the schools, or just reach out to you if they have some questions.
Man, I think I'm one of the easiest teachers to find ever. You just, Jose Vilson, type that on Google, you'll find my website, the Jose Vilson. I'm on Twitter as the JLV. I'm on Facebook, again, same name. My email would be the same, jose.l.wilson@gmail.com. So however people want to reach out to me is great.
Well, thank you very much again, Jose. And once again, I applaud you and I thank you, and much success in this coming school year.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Still talking about liberation.